Morning, historians.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
All right. Let me just check my preferences real fast. So, all right, good. Mic volume is good. Video is good. So I got a lot of emails yesterday about the quiz. I know was definitely maybe the hardest one all semester. And it was a lot of reading. It was pretty challenging. And so there'll be next week will be a much easier assignment. The chapter is real short, and you just have to write about it. So that's about World War I. For those who don't know, World War I guess it might be a little challenging, but not too bad. It's a real short chapter. So yeah. All right. So this week we are talking about the Socialist Challenge. So what was your thoughts in general about this chapter?
Well, it was very interesting. I mean, for one, who knew that Helen Keller was a socialist, but not a suffragist. I mean, I thought I heard about her advocating for women's rights.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Before I read the chapter.
Yeah, Helen Keller wasn't a suffragist. Who would have thought, huh?
Yeah, and I can see that, and I never knew how big socialism was back in those days.
Yeah. Well, in the modern context, it's like it never existed, you know. And that's because of the rhetoric. You know, if you say socialism now, you're a pariah. You are un-American. And they made that point right around this time, and you'll see that's why the next chapter is going to be good for you to write on, because it's going to talk about how socialism was destroyed with World War I, and it's very similar to the Patriot Act. So that's why 9/11 is so much bigger than the actual event itself, is because what it did was push the Patriot Act through Congress with absolute majority, and no reaction from the public, because it was fear. It's fear mongering and fear based. So when everyone's scared, like now with COVID is another example, you can almost do anything to a fearful public, and politicians continually use this strategy to marginalize and get rid of things that they don't like in society. Dissent is one of them, you know. So there's a lot of correlations with this period of time that, 100 years later resurface, and it's a strategy governments use all the time, not just America. It's kind of cliche to some extent that, in times of conflict, war, and crisis, you create a fearful population, and then you're able to get past legislation that you couldn't otherwise. And so the next chapter is about World War I and how socialism was affected by World War I. All right, so I'm going to start calling on folks. Okay, Noe, what did you think about the quiz? Any
I haven't taken it yet.
Oh, you did it?
No, I haven't. I was saving it for today.
Okay, you're going to do it today.
Yeah.
Okay, it is still available, right?
Yeah. It's due
Okay,
today.
good. Yeah, make sure you get the quiz done before the end date. All right, so did you get a chance to read it all? A little bit?
I read it.
Okay.
A little bit
What
about
what
it.
did
It
you
was
what did you
mostly
think?
about socialism and the what's it called? The writers that also wrote about it.
Yeah. So where did you get to?
I was skimming through it a little bit because
Okay.
it's very long.
Yeah, it's a long chapter. Absolutely. Okay. So we talked about, so the other thing that's in the quiz you'll notice is all the crisis or the depressions and panics. We talked about the one in 1873, 1893, and then now we're in 1907. And this is important because, especially, one of the things I hope you get out of this class is this in particular, is that everyone's always surprised when the economy goes down, when there's a recession, depression, panic. And it's because no one has a real sense of history in this country. And it's a real sad thing when no one knows the past, because what's going to happen is your future is going to be uncertain. You're not going to, you're going to be surprised when the market tanks, when your house goes down, when you lose your job, and when you study history, in particular from the beginning of the industrialization, which is this course after the Civil War up until 1907, is that in the Western economy, in the Western world, panics and depressions are embedded in the system of Western finance and in banking and in speculation. They have these things on Wall Street, where you can bet against losses, and just the whole system itself. And when we get to 2008, why that happened, it's because of the system itself is meant to do this every once in a while. It's like, it's as predictable as the sun coming up in the morning. And we are in the midst of a recession right now. And what happens is we're not going to feel it till 1, 2, 3 years later. And I knew, for instance, like I said, I lost everything in 07. I was negative $60,000. You want to know where I was at? I had multiple properties throughout my life. When I got my money from the tribe, I was one of the only ones to buy properties. I bought 5 properties. I had this, grand scheme, and then 08 happened and I lost it all, and I had to start over again. But, what the reason, and I don't want to talk about 08 too much because we will later, but it was predictable. And if I would have really, really paid attention to history and what I would have been more careful. And I guess my message to you is, as a class, is be prepared for the next recession, the next depression. It's right around the corner. It's every 10, 15, or 20 years in American society. And so we had our last one in 08, right? It took a while to get back. It actually took almost 7, 8, 10 years to recover. We go right into another one with COVID. And that's how it goes. So if you want to be prepared for that, save your money. Don't buy crap you don't need. Don't buy all these things. Like, that's why I say I use myself as the biggest example. I'm the worst at buying stuff I don't need. Like, I have 7 guitars. I barely play one lately, especially since I got a family and stuff. So instead of buying all this little everything, save your money, prepare, and then always live below your means. Say you can buy a big, beautiful house and whatever. Well, probably if you're living above your means, you're going to lose that house. So buy something below your means, so where when things do change, you'll be where you need to be, right? So if you're living always below your means, say your income changes, your financial stuff changes, and everything drops, right? Your income, everything. Well, then you'll be right where you need to be because you're already living below your means. And American society is the worst at this because we're a debtor society. We're a credit society where, you know, credit cards are okay. Run up your credit. If you can't afford something, put it on credit. And here's how you prepare for that. If you save for things that you need until you can afford them, and then you buy it not with a credit card, but with your savings, with your hard-earned savings, with your sacrifice. Always living below your means. And the reason why I'm like this is my parents fought all the time over money. My mom and my dad, my stepdad, they were awesome parents, the best in the world, but they were terrible at money. And they were always in debt, and they were always stressed out. And what that does is it'll lead to drinking too much, right? To alleviate stress. You'll become maybe, you know, an alcoholic, a drug addict to deal with the stress. And that happens a lot. That's why Americans drink so much, probably, right? More than we need to, because we're all stressed out. We have bills we can't pay. We have stuff we can't afford. And so it's, yeah, and it's very, I learned from my high school class not to rely on credit cards for purchases. Yes. Yeah. So it's so important to be important and control your finances and not be American in that regard, and be Japanese. So the Japanese after World War II, excuse me, they saved more money than any other developed nation in the world. It was a culture. The women did it. So they would take every piece of their check and they'd put it away every day, 10%, 20%. And they had the biggest savings. They no longer do it. But I studied Japanese history a lot. And I'll never forget that it's because it's a cultural thing. That's the moral of the story. It's a cultural thing. And when we're bombarded with stuff on our television every day, I need that new iPhone. I need that new car. You know, like I got a nice car. I don't need a car for 20 years, honestly, right? But how many folks keep a car for 20 years? But yeah, anyway, so I guess my moral of the story is all this stuff we're learning, everything we're learning, this chapter, the next is going to help you with your life. And you got to put in that effort and that time, and it will yield results in the present moment. And it has for me in particular. I'm back to where I was to some extent before 08 with, I have multiple properties. I rent, I have a job, you know, really, I got all my act together. I don't buy stuff I don't need anymore. I'm a minimalist. I'm trying to get rid of all the stuff that's just, you know, and the other thing too, is you're happier with less stuff. Do you know what I'm saying? You really are, because what it is, you're a prisoner by your things and your materialism. And this is probably from studying Native American culture and ideas, is I realized, man, we're so far away from that. So I try to, you know, almost like preaching, I guess, to my people, the reservation, because we're like that, you know, I was like that. We're buying cars, buying all this junk we don't need. And less is more. And real wealth comes from your relationships and your family and your purpose in life and doing something you love, not working for money. And that's really what the moral of the story is, I would tell you. And I'm 40 years old. I lived a long time. I made a lot of mistakes. I've wasted 1/3 of my life on just partying and buying junk and just being lost. But now that I have kids, that's why I've changed, because I'm trying to teach my kids to all the mistakes I made. And one of those main things is money. And be aware that the Western system is intrinsically built to fail. And this is the period of time where big banks start taking over, right? So you have this is the consolidation of finance right now after 1907. Because here's what happens after every collapse, there's a consolidation there's a consolidation, because people fall away, and then on those big fish gobble up the little fish. So say there's 100 banks, and after 1907, there's 50 banks. Those banks didn't go anywhere. They got gobbled up by JP Morgan, right? They got gobbled up by Carnegie. They got gobbled up. And that's what's happening, You know, when before '08, there was all kinds of banks out here, by the way. I used to bank at Washington Mutual. You remember that? Washington Mutual? It was a good bank. It's gone. You know, half the banks are gone after '08. Now it's Wells Fargo. It's well, Citibank doesn't exist anymore in how it used to. They went down. There's Wells Fargo, there's Bank of America, there's Union Bank. There's and what happens is, so you get this contraction and you get this consolidation by the industrialists and the banking systems. And you also at this point have this idea called Taylorism. And did anyone catch that, what that was, Taylorism? And this is very important for the socialist movement. Capitalism is evolving and it's getting more efficient. And how is it getting more efficient? And here's a hint, it's called Taylorism. Yes, yeah, the answer is yes. So when I say it gets gobbled up by the big fish, that's exactly, the money didn't go anywhere, the banks didn't go anywhere. It just gets gobbled up, it gets moved. So people think people lose money in panics and depressions. No, it's just a transfer of wealth. The money never goes anywhere. It just goes to someone else's pocket. That money I lost in '08, it didn't go anywhere. It goes to someone else, right? So someone else, like my house, I sold my house for a fraction of what it was worth, right? That wealth got transferred to the new owner, right? When I went in foreclosure, when I went into bankruptcy, all my assets, they don't go anywhere. They get transferred to somebody else. That's why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And during times like these, the rich get richer. They're having parties, they're buying yachts because all that money is going to them. And that's why it's important you understand the game, okay? The game, this is the game we live in, the world we live in. And it's very, very, it's very dynamic and it's very complicated. That's why, you know, our people in Barona, we're very, not simple in not a bad way, but we just don't understand the way the modern world works because we don't have to. We live in a, like I said, a socialist society where it's all kind of nice and neat. And, you know, the tribe takes care of you. You don't even have to know that much. But I was born in both worlds. And so that's why I said, I try to tell them, look, this is how the white world is, you know, this is how it is. You know what I mean? It's a different world. And you got to know that world because that's the dominant society. And that's the world that's going to crush you if you don't know it, like it did for me. And that was my biggest wake-up call, which is why I love history, because I love finance. I love all that. I love investing. And the whole Bitcoin thing, that scares the hell out of me, by the way, buddy. My brother made a lot of money on Bitcoin and he keeps on asking me, or I'm like, no, dude, I don't want to lose $200. I'll be pissed.
It's going down. It's going down. The Bitcoins, Ethereums.
Yeah, Elon Musk put in 1.5 billion and it tanked, right? So he probably lost 200 million. Just, you know, but you expect it to go back up, but who knows, dude, you know? But that's just one of those things where that's kind of getting off topic. But so Taylorism is this. So Taylorism is, so it has to do with the auto industry and Rockefeller and the auto, and what it is this, and this is exactly what Karl Marx talked about. This is why I'm bringing this up in the Communist Manifesto, is you become a cog in the machine. Okay. You're just sitting there 40 days, 40 hours a week, and you're just doing this. You're just doing, or maybe you're like doing a wrench and you're doing this. Imagine doing that for the rest of your life, 40 hours a week until you retire. You're literally a cog in the machine. And this is what Karl Marx warned about and said, and I just saw, and I'm going to bring it back to Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. And how many folks have read The Jungle? Upton Sinclair. I read it in college. So Upton Sinclair was about the meat packing industry. And the meat packing industry was on recently on the news with COVID because they were all dying, right? And that's exactly what I saw a special on. That's what they do at the meatpacking industry. they'll cut like the chicken's head off or whatever, move it over, cut another chicken's head off, move it over, or maybe it's the wing. So you're literally just doing the most arbitrary, to some extent, robotic thing for the rest of your life. And this was all to make, it's to divest you of your individuality and to make you an automaton. And it's also to make more money. So this is how the industrialists made more money, is they got people down to the smallest possible unit, and they made them do it over and over and over again to increase production and increase, efficiency, which means more money. And this was happening. And this is why socialism was taking off at this moment, because people were starting to realize what Karl Marx predicted in 1848. This is when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, by the way, when the West was taken from Mexico by the United States, that Karl Marx predicted. And so all those predictions started happening, and socialism starts taking off, because humans are becoming more and more cogs in the machine. And so now whenever you hear that saying, that you're never going to forget it, the cog in the machine, this is very Karl Marx. This is very, very Communist Manifesto, and it comes to fruition. So, and autos, and this is especially in the auto industry, but it's also in the meatpacking industry. And you have Upton Sinclair write this novel about how awful it is. And you have the public finally being exposed to the reality of what the workers were going through to increase profit. And you have to ask yourself, what it would feel like for your whole, and this is why it's so personal, when you're studying all this stuff, it's like, well, how would you feel doing that? Like, it'd be cool to be the guy on top, right? Making all the money. But what if you were the guy on the bottom doing that action for the rest of your life? You wouldn't want to do it. And we still have those types of jobs, of course. It's just, this is that moment in time where it began. So you have you have a lot of these things happening. And you have Mark Twain talking about, all the literature starts criticizing the imperialism of America, the working conditions of America through people like Mark Twain, Upton Sinclair, all these folks. And you have, we had sweatshops at this point, by the way. So immigrant sweatshops in New York City, where children were working for 70 hours a week in sweatshops. And so, think of like China, how we think about China right now. That used to be us. And then you finally have one of the worst accidents in American history at the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. Now, this is all part of what we talked about earlier. How many folks have heard about this incident, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company incident in New York?
I heard about it. Like they said, they get locked down, and nobody can open the door for them, and they get burned.
Yeah,
in the
they locked the
factory.
door to keep them in,
Yeah,
so they couldn't
correct.
leave.
Yeah, it's like I imagine it's like Amazon. Like my friend, he used to work in Amazon warehouse. Is not supposed to be go out. They supposed to be stick inside and they don't have the breaks, and it's the same culture, I think. Like it's moving.
Yes. Well, you hit the nail on the head, Fadi. Amazon is the perfect example to talk about right now, because the thing is this stuff still happens. This isn't the past, and that's when you realize, that's like when history starts to matter. It's like, it's not a thing of the past, it's today. And look at Amazon. People are wearing diapers because they can't have bathroom breaks. Have you seen the specials on Amazon?
I see the commentary, and my friend, he used to work in there in this environment. Like he said, like now they pay overtime. You're supposed to be stick in the work. If you work less than this amount of hour, they kick you out. Like they told you are not like it's required for them to work long times. Like, and I don't know, like the conditions seem like the factory, but there is like regulations like protect them. Some regulations like.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Tyler, go for it, man. You're on. Let me unmute you. Wait, can I? So you're on mute and yeah, you got to unmute yourself.
I just want to say for the Amazon thing, me and my friends charmingly referred to them as gulags because of their aggressive nature. And I also had a buddy who worked there, and he would just come back to me. He was like, "Yeah, this is basically a gulag. All you would do is work until you die, till you can't no more."
And so Nolan asked me a question last week, and it's a hard question. What do I believe in? Capitalism or socialism? Well, my main thing is this. I think, and this is one thing Bernie Sanders said, is the main problem we have is the distribution of wealth. That's the main problem. Call it whatever you want, socialism, capitalism, but Amazon's the richest company in the world. Jeff Bezos has how many billions of dollars? He's one of the richest men in the world. And all it would take would be a fraction of his money to treat his workers right, to give his workers a living wage. Walmart is the same. Walmart is just as bad as Amazon. Maybe not just as bad, but almost right there. And you know, we have this debate coming up about the minimum wage, right? Going to $15. And they're putting it in the COVID bill so they don't have to deal with the garbage later. That's why they're doing that, by the way, the Democrats, is because they can push it through real easy, or they can push it through real hard later doing the traditional route. But here's the moral of the story for me when it comes to Walmart, Amazon, is that when they don't pay a living wage, when they don't pay insurance, we end up paying for it, the taxpayer. So, and that's the problem I have with Walmart and Amazon is they have the money, they can afford it. They're the richest family in the world, the Waltons, Jeff Bezos. And so this is an interesting debate. We can go back and forth all day on it. There's no one way to think about it. This is how I think about it, though, is that by them not giving their workers health care and paying them living wage, then that money, we end up paying it as a taxpayer. We end up subsidizing one of the wealthiest families in the country because they can't share a fraction of their wealth. And no, Costco's better. Costco's way better than Walmart. Like I said, Walmart and Amazon, those are my two. They're on the top of the naughty list when it comes to this stuff. And the only reason, and then so there's a new movie I want you all to see, and I would love to show it. It's called Capitalism: A Love Story by Michael Moore. And you got to watch it. And what it does is he goes to Europe, and they're a socialist country, but they have rules there where the top CEO can only have a certain amount of money more than the bottom. There's this distribution of wealth law where that equity gap can only get so big, and then so what it does is this. Yeah, and I'll kid you in a moment, Tyler. Is say the guy on top wants to make more money. Well, he's got to give his workers more money because he's got to have that percentage. That equity gap can't get more than, you know, say that the CEO can't get more than 100 times more than his lowest worker. So if that CEO wants more money, guess what? He's got to give more money to his lowest workers. And that to me it's a level of socialism and still capitalism. Because I'm a realist. I'm not a utopian. And as you get older, you're going to realize, you know, you're going to be less utopianistic and idealistic and more realistic. So that's why I accept and understand capitalism's here to stay. How do we do it in a moral way? In a you know, if you're a Christian or whatever religion, how do we do it in that way? You know, and because it is a religious question as well. It's a question of morality. And that's how I would approach this, but it's a very, very, very personal thing, which is why I implore you to have your own opinions, because no one knows the actual. Yes, Tyler, go for it.
Oh, it's a question, but I'm gonna ask about, and it's about the quiz, and all I wanted to just ask, is it okay? I can retake the quiz.
Yes, that's fine. Yeah, anyone want to retake the quiz, you can send it to me and I'll add it to your points. I'm not, I'm not, the grades matter to me, but not really. What matters to me is you're doing your work and you're trying, but yes, you can. Only full, yeah. So here's the thing about your question, Fadi, is this, and they do this all the time. Companies won't do full time all the time. It happens all the time. So they don't give you the benefits. So they'll have 1,000 part-time workers and 100 full-time workers. So they don't give medical to those 1,000 workers. And so it's a method they use
Yes.
to squeeze the lower class, the
Yeah.
working class, to make more money.
Yeah. One of my workers, she's in the company 30 years she work in the company. And she do like full-time, like there's a few people do full-time in my company, and they use them a lot because they work full-time. And I know there's no there's no balancing.
No.
Yeah.
And I'm fine. Look, when it comes to struggling small business and that part-time, that new minimum wage is going to kick their butt, and then they're going to have to pay their employees medical, all that. I am very sympathetic to the small business, and that's people under 500 workers. But I'm not sympathetic to the corporations, the big corporations who have gazillions of dollars and millions. So, and that's where the argument rests when you talk about the minimum wage and all that. The small business is going to get hurt. And then
I work in the furniture sales. They make good money, but they don't treat us in the payment, and they're increasing little by little every year, and there is no benefit. They use us a lot. It's using, it's a big company. But that's their policies. Only couple cents they increasing money. Nothing else.
Yeah, and it's a very personal thing, and it's this is one of the biggest debates that will never end. But you need to know the data to make your own decision. I will say that, and after a while, it's like you'll understand both sides. It is important to understand both sides of the argument. So this is the rise of this leads to the rise of the IWW. And so what is the IWW? So this is so I set it up. So now there's a whole new radical. It's a very radical thing. So the IW
protest for the worker against for the wages and the work conditions, and they united black people with the white people worker together.
Yeah. So so before, the unions were largely white, actually male and skilled, and they didn't allow Mexicans, blacks, women, unskilled whites. Right? It was this kind of they almost became like the capitalists. I mean, for lack of a better word, where they they had the boys club, and so the IWW comes International. Let me make sure I get the acronym. Workers of the World. It gets created. Eugene Debs, the leader of the Socialist Party, and they convene in a convention, and their thing is this: one big union. And their idea was include everyone and every color, every unskilled, skilled, black, yellow, red, you name it. Basically anyone and everyone is invited. So this is this kind of, it's undivided by sex, race, and skill. And they created a constitution, and they started to develop their I guess apparatus. And this coincides with this great general strike in Pennsylvania, which happened right after that 6,000 strike, and they start to really make a difference, and they became this real force to be reckoned with because they were militant, They were courageous. They would flood jails. They were known for that. Say there was a strike and there was free speech being, they were getting arrested. Well, what they would do is like 400 or 500 would go there and all get arrested, and they would flood the jails. And this is one of the things that's when we talk about peaceful protests and how to protest the government and injustice, this is what people are talking about. If you really want to change the government and things, peaceful protests, it requires great numbers, but it's the best way to do it. And say they're arresting people, well, 1,000 people go get arrested. What are they going to do? Right? You get them to the point where they don't even know how to react. But you got to understand too, how are you going to get that many people willing to get arrested, willing to get beat? And Mahatma Gandhi was Martin Luther King's biggest idol. He's my biggest idol because he created this idea of nonviolence, the doctrine of nonviolent resistance. And Martin Luther King was exactly just like him. Without Mahatma Gandhi, you would not have Martin Luther King. And Mahatma Gandhi actually got his inspiration from Christ, from Jesus. And because the doctrine of nonviolence comes from Christ, actually. Jesus Christ, whether you believe he's a real figure or not, a God or just a man, the doctrine of nonviolence came from Jesus, which came to Mahatma Gandhi, which came to Martin Luther King. And this is one of the things he said is nonviolence has never even been tried. Really, all we've done in this world is violence, 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 and violence begets more violence. And so, and that's just something I always like to make a point of, is that nonviolence has never really been tried as a society on a mass scale until Gandhi, until Martin Luther King, and until now, where they start flooding the jails. The international industrial workers of the world become this force. And they ended up, and then they come to San Diego. So in San Diego, you have anarchists, Jack White, not the rock star Jack White, but people start getting jailed for free speech, right? And this is going to be recurrent theme through this chapter and the next, is you start having folks being jailed and silenced and censored. And you don't think about it too much in America, right? The land of free speech, but there's a moment in time where you didn't have free speech.
Correct.
And we talk about it now, and that's why the Patriot Act is so important, because we really don't live in a land of free speech. If you study the history, if you study the Patriot Act, if you study this moment in time, when we study Vietnam, when the government tries to, when really wants to, we are going to be silenced one way or the other. And that's why, that movie Snowden was important. How many folks have seen Snowden? So Snowden, and this, so out of 9/11 came this huge, Homeland Security. Homeland Security did not exist before 9/11.
Yeah, I know this guy Snowden. He was working in CIA and then he left. Yeah.
And so what they started doing is listening to all our phone calls, domestic, anyone could be listened to. So what they were saying is, at one point, like if the government didn't want something that you were saying, they would jail you without trial, without evidence. And this is what Guantanamo Bay is all about. So you could put anyone in there without a trial, without evidence, and just for the rest of your life, because they were a threat to society. So I want you to draw these correlations to the past, to the present, because that's when history starts to really come alive. Yeah, go ahead, Tyler. You got to unmute yourself.
I may have to turn.
Your audio went out. All right. So let me know when you get back to me. hold on, my wife's texting me real fast. What does she want? Okay, so we start getting silenced, and the IWW becomes like top of the list, the domestic terrorist list, right? Using a modern example. And we have real domestic problems. Don't get me wrong. It's important. You know, domestic terrorism has always been a big, important thing. And some people, we need that apparatus. We need that control, but it gets abused by the system. And no one can break the law better than lawyers and better than the government, right? So what's happening is, and I'm setting you up for next chapter though. So the IWW becomes a very, very, very strong force, and they start to really make inroads. And they actually come here to San Diego, and they get silenced. One of them gets tarred and feathered, and I think out in East County for just speaking on the public and and one of the things is this. The question is this is, you know, and this will be on your next. This is what you can write about next week. Is at what point does the government silence dissent? When should that happen? Okay, so it's definitely important, right? We need to silence some dissent in our society. For an example, the school shootings, right, or whatever. We got to silence that type of rhetoric, because I don't want my kids going to a school with people like that, or even thinking like that. So dissent must be silenced, but at what point, does it infringe on our free speech, our First Amendment right to free speech? And that's the balance we are in now with the Patriot Act and with Homeland Security, the NSA, all these new apparatus, which were designed for terrorists from the Middle East, and now it's being turned on us domestically. And the reason why I say this is we can no longer have real protest without being spied on. Say Black Lives Matter, all these groups, I guarantee they're getting their phones tapped. I guarantee it, by the government. And that is a product of the Patriot Act, of 9/11. So without 9/11, but this did happen in the 60s, by the way. So and it happened back then. Now it's just easier. And the main reason why too is this. So we have our phones, right? We have technology everywhere we go. Everything we do is being we're like spying on ourselves now. And this makes me question how resistance movements will go in the now and in the future with all this new technology. So this is maybe some ideas for paper topics that I've always been just wondering. Only history will tell 100 years from now what this is all about. And that's how history is. It's always in hindsight. Oh yeah, that was a bad idea. That was a good idea. This happened, that happened. Well, over the summer and all that, with the riots and Antifa, right? There's all these right groups, the Proud Boys, the white supremacist groups on the right, the alt-right. And then you have on the left, you have Antifa, you have, Black Lives Matter. Probably they're more of the center. But you have all these groups now, and you wonder where we are at now compared to the 60s, compared to 100 years ago, in their ability to affect positive change, not the negative stuff. And anyway, I don't know. What they need to know in order to. I don't know. So yeah. So anyways, that's just kind of just spitballing with you on that stuff. So, but here we have the IWW. You have Emma Goldman starting to happen, becoming more of a force. And then, so let's talk about, is there anything is there anything you want to talk about suffrage? So right now, there's a lot in this chapter. It's just not about socialism. It's also about women's suffrage. At this moment in time, women couldn't vote and Native Americans couldn't either. So if I was born at this time, I wouldn't be able to vote because I'm a part of a Indian reservation. I'm a member. So I wouldn't have been able to vote until after women in 1924. Native Americans couldn't vote until 1924. Women couldn't vote until 5 years before that, 4 or 5 years before that. So what did you get? And you talked about this a little bit about women's suffrage, Nolan. It's a very important time in our history. Just to set up, it started in England, by the way, women's suffrage, and it came here. And there's actually a movie on it. All right. Anyone want to talk about women's suffrage? So Emma Goldman talked about it. Helen Keller. And what were their ideas?
It was like the men, they have like the ability to get vote than the women, and there's a percentage of men, it's bigger percentage than women to get involved in voting. And I see like there's regulation for women, like clothing, pregnancy control, and who can transport with her father or something. You can't do anything, any relationships. And even like it's the weird thing, like they measure the time for the women inside the toilet, using the toilet and something. It was like weird things. I didn't hear about it before.
Mm-hmm.
And there is feminist movement too, but I didn't get it. Like, what's the difference between feminist movement and the socialist movement? Like, what's the difference between it?
So the feminist movement is defined differently by different women at different times. Largely though, it's similar in you know, the civil rights of Black Americans, Native Americans, and what they really wanted was equality, equal pay, equal opportunity. It was in this back not too long ago, women couldn't get in a doctoral program, for instance. There was one of my idols in my field, Florence. She was the first like Kumeyaay scholar. She's non-Indian. She couldn't get in a doctoral program here because she was a woman. So she had to go to Hawaii to get her doctorate, and just so stuff like that. And you know, you hear the term the glass ceiling, right? There's a ceiling you can't see, but you can feel. That's what that means. And you can only go so far if you're Black, if you're a woman, if you're Indian, if your name sounds ethnic or different, right? And that's what the glass ceiling is. And so feminism, it takes on different forms as a sexual revolution. Some women think that's too far, you know, like a sexual liberation. But you got to understand the history of misogyny. And that's misogyny means the hatred of women. And it's in particular in Western society. If you study Native American societies, we don't have that. Okay, there's a balance of feminine and masculine. You know, if you look at a medicine wheel of a Native American medicine wheel, there's north, south, east, west. That east west is male and female, and the goal of all the medicine wheel is to be in the middle. It's not to be too anything. It's to be balanced, and that's a societal thing, not an individual thing. That's different. And that's how Native Americans approach gender and male and female, LGBTQ, however you want to frame it. It was all about balance. And the message, I took a class in USD about this misogyny, the history of it. And it starts from Adam and Eve, because Eve is blamed for the fall of mankind, womankind, you know, humanity. The woman is blamed. And from that, you have this kind of hatred of women, and you have the Salem witch trials in America, right? And that was all from that history. So the suffrage movement comes out of all this garbage, right? All this, and one of the most important things we can, whether you like it or not, if its efficiency is vote. Voting is such an important thing we do as a society. And all I got to say is, if you don't like our democracy, go to a place that doesn't have democracy. Our democracy may be it may not be what you like, but at least we have a democracy. And to participate in that democracy is one of the best things you can do as a citizen. And women were finally given this opportunity to vote, and they had all these different sides of the debate. So Emma Goldman, Helen Keller, they had different feelings about it. Some women could care less. Some really wanted it. But like any movement, everyone's got their own opinion about it. And so that came about at this moment in time where it was, and you got to understand, so the main leaders of this country from the beginning have always been white Anglo-Saxon males. So you have this approach, all of a sudden everyone's rising, right? Into IWW, women, blacks are starting to assert themselves. And so the question is what is the reaction from the top? What are they going to do? And that's where this next chapter is going to answer. World War I will answer that question, and what they do with that crisis, what they do with all crisis to consolidate their power and to silence dissent. And that's what happens time and time again. It's cliche and modern, and it's very modern, by the way. So when you talk about empires, the Roman Empire, all that, you have a whole different tool chest. You have all these different things. Like I said, you don't have these. This is the greatest tool since forever. For that, to have control. That's why you had Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, all that. They're now creating our elections. Manipulating our elections with their data, the algorithms. So you have all these new tools to the tool chest, and it's really, really hard to keep up. I'll be honest, if I didn't watch the news like I do and read like I do, I would be lost with what's going on. You got to really put in the time and really be savvy to know what's going on anymore. And a lot of folks don't do that. They put in a fraction of the amount of time needed. So what happens is this. So this is called the progressive period. And I'm going to end on this. So we have the progressive period, which it didn't make fundamental change. And that's the important thing. So you have reforms that are answering the problems, right? They're addressing the problems, but not in a fundamental way. And that's how the government addressed these things, because it wasn't really changing anything, but just enough to make people calm down. Okay, we'll give them just enough so they relax. So we don't got to deal with their uprising. So you have Roosevelt with the Meat Inspection Act. And back then, now this is a big deal. Back then, they didn't have any regulation on anything, right? And people died all the time from food poisoning. Botulism was one, a can of tuna. A whole Indian family died out here in the early 1900s from a can of tuna. They all died, all of them. Grandma, dad, kid, and they had a huge funeral. Kind of became an urban legend. So you had the Meat Inspection Act by Roosevelt, the Drug and Food Act, the Hepburn Act to regulate the railroad, to kind of answer the call from monopolies. Then you have Taft, President Taft, enact telephone and telegraph regulation. The ICC was created. So all these acronyms we hear, all these regulations are going to start coming about. The FDA, right? They're coming out of this era where no regulation was even before at all. And now you have all these new government agencies to regulate. And this is called the progressive period. Taft, he proposed the 16th Amendment. So you get taxes. So this is where income tax starts coming out. So before this, there was no income tax. People don't realize that. Income tax is a new thing. And it used to be one piece of paper. My CPA has it, the original income tax thing. It was one piece of paper. That was your income tax. So you have all that, the 17th Amendment, election of senators by popular vote instead of by the state legislator. We didn't used to vote in our senators at this time. It was the state legislator. We just voted in the state legislator and they voted in the Senate, senators. Laws passed to regulate wages and hours too. So this is the essence of the progressive period. But the moral of the story is this: fundamental conditions did not change for most people. And that was the moral of that story. But you got to take the gains where you can. These are good stuff happen. You can look at this one way or the other. And that's why Zinn has such a powerful, he has such a strong socialist, I guess, bias. And you got to realize that when you're reading it, that folks could interpret this very differently. And history books do and will. And so it would be nice I would love to give you two like opposite history books, but that'd be a lot of reading, because this is where he becomes really like socialist leaning. So this is also the moment of the new middle class is born. So so the middle class is gone right now, right? It was pretty much destroyed. The middle class is gone. It's leaving us. But this is the birth of the middle class at this era too. So you have the affluent, skilled workers in unions, most of them immigrant Jews and Italians. So they're specific immigrant groups that become part of this new immigrant class, and there's specific immigrant groups that are excluded. Okay, the Mexican population coming up at this time, definitely excluded, right? And all that rhetoric we hear now about Mexicans is from 100 years ago, by the way. It's nothing new.
I read there's a Syrian guy, he get killed in something protest.
Yeah. And yes. And to answer your question, Nolan, yes, the middle class is still here, but it's disappearing. That's a better way of saying it. And there's consensus on that. And that's one of the biggest problems we have as an American society is when the middle class is disappearing because of we're being overtaxed, right? We're being underpaid, overtaxed, and the government is creating, just like the government created a middle class, the government is making the middle class disappear. And that there's consensus on that on the right and the left about the middle class disappearing.
So you're saying is that the middle class might be disappearing because the government because it depends on how much income they receive and how much they get taxed by how much taxes they receive from the government.
And inflation. You got to add inflation. So one of the things, so what we're experiencing now, Nolan, is stagflation. So it's a stagnant economy. So this is how much money we've made since the 80s with inflation. It hasn't moved. Before that, like say the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you had Americans in the middle class going this way, where the income was allowing them to live a middle class life. And then all of a sudden by the 80s, you have it kind of level off, and dollar for dollar, if you're going to compare our dollar to back then, we've made the same amount, yet the cost of goods have gone up. The price of water, of electricity, of property tax. So part of it is the government's fault. Part of it is globalization. Okay, we live in a globalized world where we lost our factories, right? So this is the moment where America is this is where all the factories are. So now we no longer produce goods. We're a service economy. We're a service economy, not a manufacturing economy. And a service economy is important. Think of finance, banking, accounting. That's a service economy. Think of medical, right? I'm a teacher. I'm servicing you. I'm not really making anything. I'm a service. I would be part of that economy. But you have now China manufacturing and creating all of our goods. And literally, they tore all of our factories, the scrap metal, and they put all that scrap metal in China. So you have a stagnant economy with inflation. And that is in essence why the middle class is disappearing. And here's the thing, though. Here's the thing, Nolan. It's a great debate. Most people think they're middle class when they're not. If you did a survey on the average American, almost you would get a really big amount saying they're middle class when they're actually not. And this is the messaging we feel and have, because honestly, to be middle class, you got to be making like $130,000, right? Something like that, and to feel to where you go on vacation, you put your kids in school, you have time, and now that's why you need two incomes, right? So you may have a middle class family, but you're both working way too much than you would in the 50s, where your mom could stay at home or your dad could stay at home and the other one would go to work, and you still have time. You could still go to Hawaii on the summer or New York. You could go put your kid in college. And that's why you got to see this movie, Capitalism, A Love Story by Michael Moore. You'll see exactly what I mean. And I'm going to show Michael Moore a film on 9/11 in this class. I'm a big Michael Moore fan, because he just kind of tells it like it is. And he's he's got his own bias, but he's not in your face about it. That's why I like Michael Moore. His first movie was Bowling for Columbine. It was about the shooting in Colorado and how they had this massacre in Colorado, and then they wouldn't change the gun laws. So he's really touched on a lot of these issues we have. Other countries can raise prices on us. Yeah. So what your question would be, tariffs, Michelle. So tariffs are how you accomplish that. And we try to get these free trade agreements so you do not have tariffs. But yes, sometimes tariffs are inevitable. And that's why when we went to war with China, our tariff wars, that's what they started doing. And they killed our farmers because they raised tariffs on our farmers.
So I have a question. Is in China there's a middle class or not?
So China is no. I mean, no. If you talk to any Chinese who's from there, like really from China, they say the life, the living wage, the lifestyle is on the bottom tier. They're like how we were when we were industrializing. Like in this era, this is how China is now. No regulation, sweatshops, all that, right? No control on hours or wages. And that's why you have these, and China's really good at silencing dissent, by the way, if you want to see that. So there's a lot of parallels with this era right now that China's going in through now, but that's a little more dynamic. China is a very, very big topic. But these ideas you can transpose onto them for sure right now. But they also they don't live in a democracy. They live in a dictatorship of communists where, you have no voice. That's why, anyone who hates our democracy, just like, well, it could be worse. I'm always a glass half full type person. I try to see the good in things. And the only way you can do that sometimes is by knowing how bad it is somewhere else. Unfortunately, that's not really, good sometimes, but it's true. So what you do now is here, I'll end on this is right now you start having banking and business starting to control our government at this moment in time. So Bankers Magazine wrote, it's on 253 in 1901, as the business of the country has learned the secret combination, it is gradually subverting the power of the politician and rendering him subservient to its purpose. So you have politics starting to be subservient to the business community, to the banking community, to the financial community. They start owning our politicians at this point in time. And that's something that is currently happening. And I would say both sides would agree, whether you're Republican or Democrat, there's this idea of too much money in politics. It started right now, 120 years ago. This is when it started being consolidated and politicians became subservient to the business community. And it is what it is. And, it's not really an American thing. If you go all around the world, you see this. It's a human thing. And I really like to make that point in my classes all the time. so you don't, focus on one group, one person. It's like, no, this is human. This is a human thing where business and politics are one. And how do you take them out? That's the $1 million question. How do you take business and money out of politics so it's a reflection of the people and not of someone's corporation? And that's the thing. So because you can't expect a corporation to have morality, to do the right thing. They're all they care about is giving dividends to their stockholders. That is that's the goal of a corporation, giving dividends to your stockholders. Okay, how do you square that round hole with a square peg when you want your democracy to be representative of the people, of the voice of the people? We live in a republic, which is a representative government, right? It's supposed to represent us. Our politicians are supposed to represent us, but they also represent these huge corporations. And so this is an interesting paper topic as well. Great. It's great to jump in that rabbit hole, by the way, because you're not going to come out the same. And so this is that moment in time. If you're looking for the page number 253, it's on mine, the Bankers Magazine quote, a very, very powerful quote. And the moral of the story is this: they're the ones saying it. Okay. Not their opposition. They are the ones saying it in their own words. And this is the funny thing about history and stuff, is a lot of the most incriminating things come from the people themselves, and they're not hiding anything. So this, like I said, this isn't really debatable as far as like controversial. It's kind of like, yeah, that's just how it is. So the progressive movement starts to right about this time. Financials starts to change. Everything starts to change, and the controls started getting more precise. So here's the last couple of quotes I'll add. And so did the progressive reforms succeed in doing what they intended? This is on page 254 for my book. To stabilize the capitalistic system. So the question is this: did the progressive reforms succeed in doing what they intended? Stabilize the capitalistic system by repairing the worst defects. Blunt the edges of the socialist movement. Restore some measure of class peace in a time of increasingly bitter clashes between capital and labor. And that's the moral of this chapter, is what were the progressive reforms really designed to do? What did they do? What did they not do? Okay, and you got to understand from a politician, this is like, if you're the politician, you're thinking, okay, what am I trying to do? What did I succeed in doing? What did I not do? And so we ended on the coal strike, where they massacred 26 people, and that's at the end of the chapter. And that's not really that big of a deal. It's a small footnote in this chapter. And so, yeah, so we have kind of summed that up pretty good. I'm happy with that summary of that chapter, and you will be ready for next chapter. And I promise you, this next chapter is going to be easy, much easier. I just got done reading it. It's super fast to read. It's not really that complicated. It's about World War I. It's pretty interesting, and it's a really brief example of the war. So please get your assignments in. Try not to get behind. I know I don't mind folks getting a little behind, and especially under certain circumstances, it's okay. So yes, does the reading allow any topics as long as it relates to war as the health of the state? Yes. So I made up a questionnaire. You can use those questions or not, just to make it easier on you. But I will say this: if you're going to make general statements about the whole chapter, make sure you're right, spot on. If you just want to focus on one thing, but whatever you do, make sure you're spot on. So if you want to take the whole chapter on, that's cool, but just make sure you do it right. If you want to take a portion of the chapter, all I care about is that you're not misstepping with your scope. So it's a pretty interesting chapter. I think you'll like it. World War I. And with all these themes though, everything we just talked about now is going to kind of come to a conclusion in this next chapter to some extent, but we'll still keep going. But a lot of these things kind of become, kind of, the ink gets dried for lack of a better word. So yeah, my apologies for that last chapter. I know it was it kicked your butt. But I will say this is college. College is hard. If it was easy, everyone would have a degree, right? If it was easy, everyone would have a degree. And college is reading a lot. It's writing a lot. So I don't want to I know it's in COVID and I've struggled back and forth about the rigor. Is it too much? Is it too little? The only thing I can really do is not really adjust the rigor, but maybe the due dates. I can be real flexible with that. And so I do want to let you know, I understand a lot of you folks are going through a lot right now, and I want to be flexible, and I will be flexible, but just try not to get too far behind. And because I want to get those research papers started soon. So start thinking about those research papers. And when you have an idea, just shoot me a proposal at any time. Say, hey, I want to talk about this, is this cool? And I'll tell you, there's probably not much on it, or, that's a good one. So start thinking about your paper topic, and I'll see everyone next week. Thank you for coming. And is there anything you want to say before I go? Oh, analytical or argumentative? So it's a historical paper. So think of it this way. You want to develop a thesis and support it with historical evidence, right? So you'll analyze the data at the end. This is what I think about it, but develop a thesis. Okay, capitalism does this. Monopolies do this. Give me historical evidence, quotes, and then analyze at the end your opinion, but not just an opinion. It's like, you've done all this work. Here's the reason why. Here's why I believe this. And then, boom, conclusion. So it's not very hard. 4 pages is not a big deal. Personally, I think it's I'm kind of giving you a softball with that. And that's kind of the least I can do in these trying times. But I want you to succeed, get you to the next level. And that's why I'm going to push you a little bit harder than that's kind of my job. So I hope everyone's okay. I hope, stay up in the readings, and I'll see you on Thursday. We're going to talk about the rise of the KKK and what happened after the Civil War. So take it easy, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.